The broadcast ran for 11 minutes and 42 seconds. I know the exact duration because I watched it 3 times in the officer's lounge aboard the Air's Candor on the night it aired, and each time I thought I had misheard something, so I rewound and listened again. I hadn't misheard anything. High Executor Veth Solis of the Vel-Rath Dominion, 4-star admiral by their reckoning, chairman of the Dominion's Joint Defense Compact, a gray-scaled officer whose amber throat sac had reportedly never once flushed the pale gold of embarrassment in 40 years of public life, stood at a Dominion Council podium and delivered what his staff had titled, in their own press release, Comprehensive Assessment of Galactic Humanitarian Theater. He used the word circus twice. He used the phrase performative generosity 4 times. He had a particular line about Earth's relief doctrine that got picked up and rebroadcast across 17 systems. They send doctors to wars they did not fight and engineers to disasters they did not cause. And they call this civilization. What they have built is the galaxy's most expensive vanity fleet. The applause in the chamber went on for a while. I remember the sound of it. 31 years old at the time. 3 months out of my surgical residency and 4 weeks into my first deployment aboard the Candor. I had chosen relief medicine specifically, not military trauma, not planetary emergency response, not the higher-paying colony work. Relief medicine, the kind where you go to the places no one else is going, where the patients don't share your biology, where the equipment never quite fits, and the translation software always lags 2 beats behind the pain. I had chosen it because I believed in it. Watching Veth Solis explain to a chamber full of scaled officers why what I did was theater. I remember thinking that I would file that, broadcast it away somewhere and not let it affect the work. I was good at that for a while. Over the next decade, the Vel-Rath Dominion continued its commentary. They voted against Earth's membership application to the Chem-Sorath Trade Compact. The application, that would have reduced tariffs on relief supply chains by 40% and let us pre-position surgical caches in outer arm systems. They declined to participate in the Joint Emergency Response Framework that 17 other species had signed. Their state media ran, at irregular intervals, updates on what they called Earth's Aid Theater, with particular attention to any mission that had produced ambiguous outcomes, any fleet deployment that had cost more than it recovered, any case where human medics had arrived too late. They kept a running accounting of failures. They were thorough about it. I read the updates when they came through. I filed them in the same place I had filed the broadcast. I kept working. The Candor completed 61 humanitarian deployments in those 10 years. I was for 44 of them. I operated on Veth workers with compound crush injuries from a mining collapse. 6 hours in a jury, rigged field station with improvised retractors and a translator that kept rendering the patient's pain descriptions as weather forecasts. I assisted 3 Orvan surgeons through a hemorrhagic fever outbreak that none of our training had prepared any of us for, and that we improvised, through on the fly, losing 2 patients on the first day, and then not losing another one for the remaining 18. I spent 6 weeks in a Vel-Sorathi quarantine zone that the Chem-Sorath Compact had sealed and abandoned, and came out lighter by 12 pounds and heavier, by something I still don't have a word for. I watched TAC, Senior Medic Oren TAC, who had been deployed longer than anyone else on our team, and who had a quiet competence that I have never encountered in quite the same form in anyone else before or since. I watched TAC resect a Vel-Sorath arterial cluster by feel in a power failure during that quarantine deployment, and I made myself watch closely because I understood that what I was seeing was something I needed to be able to do someday. The work was the work. It didn't stop being the work because someone in a Dominion press office had opinions about it. I was 31, then 32, then 36, then 41, and the deployments accrued and the skills built, and the file where I kept the broadcast stayed where I had put it, and I did not take it out very often. Then the Vel-Rath lattice failed, and everything changed. I was asleep in my bunk when the alert sounded. The low register tone that means the Candor is shifting to operational readiness, not the shriek that means we're under fire. I was dressed and moving to the medical bay before I was fully conscious. Senior Medic TAC met me at the hatch with a tablet and a look I hadn't seen on him in a while. Not the deployment look, which is a particular settled quality. More the look from the worst of the quarantine zone nights, where the parameters hadn't been established yet, and everything depended on how the next hour went. Vel-Rath space, he said. Dominion interior. Automated defense grid. Their grid, I said. What about it? It's firing on their own civilian convoys. I stopped walking. He didn't. Keep moving, Tack said, not unkindly. Captain's briefing, in 4 minutes. The Vel-Rath Lattice was the Vel-Rath Dominion's crown achievement in autonomous defense infrastructure, a distributed network of orbital, platforms, deep space relay nodes, and surface-based weapons arrays that had taken 40 years, and an amount of resources their finance ministry had, never fully disclosed, to construct. It was designed to defend Dominion space from external threats without requiring continuous manned operation. It could identify, track, and engage any vessel whose transponder signature did not match the Dominion's friend or foe registry. It had been operational for 6 years. It had been the centerpiece of 3 Dominion military parades. High Executor Solis himself had given a speech at its commission ceremony about the future of autonomous security doctrine. I had read a summary of the speech. Because we received all Dominion public broadcasts in our intelligence file, and the speech contained a passage about how the Lattice represented the mature evolution of defensive capability beyond the need for what he called reactive charity missions by well-meaning amateurs. I had filed that one too. The cascade failure had begun 47 hours before our alert sounded. A software update to the Lattice's IFF registry. Routine maintenance, distributed automatically across all nodes, had introduced a corruption error in the transponder recognition subroutine. The corruption was subtle. The registry had not failed to recognize civilian transponders. It had misclassified them, had resorted the signature patterns into the threat designation category used for a class of hostile sensor spoofing vessels that the Lattice had been specifically updated to detect 3 months prior. The Lattice had then begun acting on those classifications. By the time we received the distress signal, 17 civilian convoys in the Dominion's interior transit lanes were under active engagement from their own defense network. Casualty estimates were preliminary and already significant. The Dominion's military had attempted manual override from 3 separate command centers. The Lattice's autonomous protocols had locked them out in accordance with its anti-spoofing architecture, which had been specifically designed to resist override commands from compromised or captured facilities. Every failsafe had a counter-failsafe. Every lock had an automatic bolt. It was, in the most complete sense of the phrase, working exactly as intended. Of this in the 4 minutes between Tack's hallway briefing and the captain's formal one. Commander Yasmin Osi-Batang was at the head of the table when I came in, already in full command configuration, tablet in hand, map display active, forward planning board, showing the jump corridor into Dominion space. She was a compact woman from Accra by way of 6 deployments, and a surgical theater that she rejumped with the same energy she brought to everything else. Direct, fast, zero patience for ambiguity, and a particular quality of attention that made you feel, when she was focused on you, that you were the most important piece of the problem currently on the board. She didn't look angry. She looked the way she always looked before a hard deployment. Like she was already inside it, already working the problem, already 3 decisions ahead of wherever the conversation was starting. You've seen the preliminary, she said. It wasn't a question. Vel-Rath civilian convoys, I said, their Lattice. 17 confirmed convoys in the engagement corridor. Estimate puts casualties at between 800 and 1,200. With that number climbing for as long as the Lattice keeps misidentifying. We have a software engineering team aboard who think they can spoof the IFF recognition subroutine if they can get close enough to interface with a Lattice relay node directly. The passive broadcast attack won't propagate at the range we'd normally keep. She paused. The Dominion has formally requested assistance. The room was quiet. There were 8 of us around the table. Osi-Batang, me, Tack, Chief Engineer David Margveliani, who was already annotating something on his own tablet with the rapid concentration of a man who was doing math in his head and not liking the answers. 2 surgical residents named Priya Venkataraman and Sofian Mesaoud, who had less than a year of deployment. Between them, the Cantor's navigation officer Lieutenant Kemi Adeyemi and Dr. Yusuf Abara, our xenobiology specialist, who had been studying Vel-Rath physiology for the better part of 2 years, and who, in an emergency of this kind, was worth more than any single piece of equipment we carried. Any other respondents? I asked. O.C. Boating's jaw moved. The Chem-Sorath Compact has classified it as an internal Dominion systems matter and declined to send assets. The Veth-Sorath Union is cited on jurisdictional protocols. The Aaron cluster has offered condolences and a statement of concern through their diplomatic channel. Condolences, Tak said. That's what I said, O.C. Boateng said. We are the responding fleet, us, the surgical frigate Endurance, the surgical frigate Persistence, and the logistics tender Goodwill. Combined, we have 3 fully equipped surgical theaters, enough xenobiology support for Vel-Rath physiology intervention, and Margveliani's software team. We jump in 3 hours. I need medical department at full readiness within 2. She looked around the table. Questions? There were no questions. I was staging the surgical bay and running Abara through the case triage protocol before the briefing room had fully cleared. Vel-Rath physiology had been in my working knowledge base since my 2nd year of residency. Knowing anatomy in the abstract and operating in the field under pressure are different in ways that only become apparent when the stretcher clears the airlock and the patient's throat sac is already the wrong color. Abara had spent the last year compiling a Vel-Rath trauma intervention manual that went significantly beyond the standard xenobiology texts, and in the 90 minutes between the briefing and our jump he ran me, Tak, and the 2 residents through the critical points with an intensity that I had rarely seen from him. The secondary cardiac node, location, approach, the specific complication risk when the primary was already under stress, the bilateral lung architecture, which interventions required coordination of both cavities, which could be addressed in isolation, the dermal plate structure, how to read strike damage versus blast pressure versus internal hemorrhage through the external presentation was significantly different from smooth-skinned species and completely different from human presentation. The blood coagulant chemistry and the substitute protocols we'd be working with, and the interaction risks. The throat sac is the fastest early warning system you have, Her said. Pale gray means shock, and it will go pale gray before the monitors catch it. If you see pale gray, you don't wait for the monitor to confirm, you act immediately. How fast does it shift? Priya asked. Fast enough that you'll feel behind if you're watching the screen instead of the patient, Abara said. Watch the patient. I wrote it all down, though I didn't need to. That kind of instruction stays. We came out of the jump corridor into Dominion space at 0340 ship time, and the lattice was already tracking us. I know this because Adeyemi told us calmly that we had 22 lattice platforms in active sensor range, and that our transponder was not on the Dominion's friend or foe registry, and that Margveliani's software team had approximately 40 minutes to achieve an IFFF spoof before the platforms began target acquisition protocols. I was not on the bridge for this. I was in the surgical bay, which was already staged and lit and ready, and was listening to the command channel on my headset, because O.C. Boateng had a standing rule that the medical chief stayed on the command channel during any operational approach. I had found over the years that this rule was either the best or the worst idea depending on what the command channel was saying at any given moment. We're broadcasting the distress acknowledgement code the Dominion sent, Adeyemi said. It's buying us time, but it won't hold the lattice permanently. The corruption is making it indecisive on ambiguous signals, is buying us additional time, but eventually the decision matrix will resolve. Margveliani, O.C. Boateng said. What do you need? Primary relay node, Margveliani said. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who is running calculation after calculation and has pressed all the result anxiety into the math rather than the speech. Physical interface. The passive broadcast attack won't propagate through the encryption at range. I've been trying it for the last 10 minutes, and the key cycling is fast. We need to dock or grapple to a primary node and hard interface directly. Nearest primary node? I'm extrapolating from the platform distribution pattern, Adeyemi said. The lattice's architecture is proprietary. The Dominion has never published the relay topology, but based on the platform clustering, there's a high probability primary node location at approximately 800,000 kilometers, roughly 11 o'clock from our current heading. Time to reach it at full burn? 26 minutes. But if we burn hard toward a lattice node, the approach vector looks aggressive to the target acquisition algorithm. We may accelerate the timeline rather than beat it. Other options. There was a pause. We drift, Margveliani said. Full low emission profile. Shut down everything non-essential. Reduce drive output to minimum station keeping. Let the momentum carry us toward the node. The lattice's corruption is specific to transponder misclassification, not to general anomaly detection. A vessel with no active drive signature and no transponder signal is an anomaly the corrupted subroutine may not know how to categorize. It was looking for civilian transponders that had been relabeled as threats. If we don't look like anything that's manifest, it may not act on us. Time on that approach? 78 minutes to interface range. Maybe 90. And our lattice resolution window, assuming the anomaly flag holds, indefinite in theory. The longer we go without triggering a classification, the less likely the algorithm is to force a resolution. But I can't guarantee it. It's a corrupted system, and it may behave unpredictably. O.C. Boating didn't hesitate. All ships go dark. Non-essential systems off. Drive to minimum station keeping. Navigation lights off. Emission profile as cold as you can manage without losing life support. Margveliani, the moment we are in hard interface range of that node, I want the IFF propagation running. Don't wait for my order. You'll know when we're closest enough. What followed was one of the stranger stretches of time in my career. The Candor went dark, emergency lighting casting the surgical bay in a dim, amber red, the atmosphere recirculation reduced to a slow background murmur. The equipment on battery backup, the external viewport going from the clear black of powered running to the same clear black of low power drift, which looked exactly the same. Space doesn't change its presentation based on your operational status. I sat in the surgical bay and waited. Tatch came and sat beside me after 20 minutes. He brought a water container and a protein bar, which was a characteristically practical gesture. He didn't say anything for a while. This was one of his most useful qualities. Tack had a sense of when silence was the right instrument for a situation, and he used it accordingly. "You think it'll hold?" he asked, eventually, very quietly, as though the lattice platforms might be listening through the hull. Margveliani thinks so, I said. Margveliani is almost always right about the engineering, Tack said. That's either reassuring or frightening, depending on how you look at it. Choosing reassuring. Good policy, he said. We ate the protein bars in the amber red dark and listened to the command channel and watched. The backup power indicator on the surgical equipment cycling through its low power holding pattern. Somewhere outside the hull, 78 minutes away at drift speed, a software fix waited to be applied to a system that had turned on the people it was built to protect. Somewhere inside that same system, civilian transports were doing what the Vel-Rath had done. Running cold, hunting sensor shadows, trying to stay off a list they had always been on. At 31 minutes into the drift, Ibarra came to sit with us. He brought a different protein bar, which he did not eat. He spent most of his time reviewing his trauma intervention notes on a tablet running at minimum brightness. His lips moved slightly when he read. I had noticed this before and never said anything about it. At 44 minutes, Adiemi's voice came very quietly over the channel. We have a Vel-Rath warship at bearing 270, range 400 kilometers. It's cold. Signature 0, navigation lights off. It's matching our emission profile almost exactly. I sat up. Damaged? No visible damage. It went cold deliberately. It's sitting there the same way we're sitting here. A pause. It's a Dominion destroyer. Based on the silhouette and the class markings on the comm registration, it's transmitting a low-power identification ping on the Dominion military band. Vel-Rath, standing blade of the home sea rough translation. They know we're here? O.C. Boateng asked. They went cold the moment we entered their sensor range, Adiemi said. They saw us. They matched our profile. They are not hailing. A threat? A pause. I don't think so, Commander. They've had targeting solutions on us for at least 15 minutes if they wanted them. They're watching. Let them watch, O.C. Boateng said. Stay the course. At 63 minutes, Ademi said. Lattice platform cluster adjusting at bearing 145. 2 of the 22 are rotating sensor arrays toward our drift vector. They see us? He asked immediately. Unknown. It may be routine rotation, holding pattern, 3 minutes of silence, then rotation completed. They've moved on. At 71 minutes, Mark Vellini said, I have the node. The next 17 minutes were, from the medical bay, completely invisible. I heard Mark Vellini's voice in fragments, the tight, efficient shorthand of an engineer interfacing with a hostile system, and Ademi reading out lattice status metrics, and 2 of Mark Vellini's software team in the background calling out confirmation codes. I heard the moment the spoof propagated, not from a dramatic announcement but from a change in Ademi's voice. A very slight, controlled relaxation in the vowels when she said, Lattice target acquisition flag is clearing. Platform cluster at 145 going passive. Cross-checking remaining platforms. A pause. Commander, Lattice is standing down. O.C. Boateng said, all ships bring power back online, navigation lights on. Ademi, get me the first convoy's position. Already have it. Vel-Rath, bearing 030, range 60,000 kilometers. They've gone active. They're reading our power-up. They're broadcasting. Put it on the medical channel, I said. The broadcast came through in Vel-Rath, with the translation running a beat behind. A ship medic's voice, controlled and professional, under what sounded like significant strain, reading off a casualty count and requesting medical priority response. I started checking equipment. The first convoy reached us 40 minutes later. The cargo transport Vel-Rath was a mid-class vessel out of the Dominion's 3rd transit hub. Industrial manifest, mixed freight, and in its passenger compartments, a civilian resettlement group of 308 Vel-Rath civilians, bound for an agricultural settlement in the outer transit system. The Lattice had engaged the convoy twice before the IFF fix had propagated. First strike had taken out the convoy's lead escort, a patrol craft that had absorbed most of the initial salvo and bought the convoy's captain enough time to push the transport into the sensor shadow of a mid-system asteroid body. The second strike had hit the transport directly before it reached full cover, taking out the port engine assembly, reaching 2 compartment sections that had been issuing passes and injuring or killing everyone in the forward passenger compartments. The ship medic's triage notes came through on a separate data stream as the airlock cycled. I read them while I waited for the hatch. First stretcher carried a young Vel-Rath male. I estimated 20 years, possibly younger, scaled in the lighter gray-green of adolescence, not yet the deeper ash-gray of mature military coloring. His shoulder was packed and dressed. The ship medic's work, competent field dressing, but the pressure vessel beneath was bleeding through at a rate that told me she hadn't been able to address the source. His amber throat sac was deeply flushed, the gold of acute pain, not the pale gray of shock, which was good news. His eyes were wide and tracking, and when he registered the faces of the people receiving him, the expression that crossed his face was something that didn't fit cleanly into any clinical category I had. We have you, I said. The translator ran. You are aboard the Earth humanitarian relief ship Candor. We are going to take care of your injury. You're safe here. He said something in Vel-Rath that the translator rendered after a long pause, as, did not think you would come. I had the dressing off and was reading the wound before he finished the sentence. Deep pressure vessel compromise, secondary tissue damage from blast shear, the kind of injury that needed repair within the next 40 minutes to prevent irreversible loss. Nothing we hadn't handled before, nothing that was going to beat us. We come when there's a call, I said. It's what we do. Priya, I need a pressure assist running at Vel-Rath coagulant protocol. Sophion, blood substitute line. The secondary formula. Abara has the correct dosage ratio. Let's move. We moved. What followed is, in my memory, not a continuous sequence, but a series of particular, specific images that stand out from the general motion of hard medical work. The surgical bay filling. All 3 stations active within the first hour, TAC's team running parallel in the secondary bay and the residents taking their cases under supervision, and Abara, moving constantly between the two rooms, watching throat sacs and reading outputs, and calling early warnings. The sound of Vel-Rath bilateral breathing under pain, a controlled double intake, deliberate, using the respiratory architecture to modulate distress, which filled the bay for hours and which I learned to parse. The rhythm of someone managing, the different rhythm of someone starting to lose the management. The smell of Vel-Rath metabolic chemistry, under trauma, which Ibarra had warned us about, and which the ventilation system was running hard to process. Around the third hour, Ibarra caught a patient going into secondary cardiac failure before any of our monitors had flagged it. He was watching the throat sac, a middle-aged male, strike shrapnel injury, apparently stable post-initial intervention, and he said very quietly, "Gray." And by the time I crossed the bay, he was already starting the intervention protocol. We got the patient back. It took 11 minutes, and I was aware, during all 11 of them, of the particular cost of those 11 minutes on everything else in the room. The patient came back, and that was the accounting. Around the 5th hour, we got a case that TAC brought to me from his bay because he wanted a second set of hands. A Vel-Rath female in late middle age, military officer, based on the rank marking on her collar, the kind of caste marking that indicated a command position, though her uniform was torn enough that I couldn't read the specific designation. Strike blast trauma to the lower torso, with involvement of the secondary cardiac node, that was significantly more complicated than the male's case from 2 hours prior. The secondary node in Vel-Rath physiology is not analogous to anything in the human body. It is not a backup heart, exactly, pressure regulation system, that the primary cardiac function depends on, in ways that the medical literature describes as synergistically critical, which is the academic way of saying that if you lose the secondary node, you lose the primary shortly after. Hers was partially occluded by blast shear, not destroyed, not even critically damaged in isolation, sitting in a position that created pressure buildup at the primary node's outflow valve. TAC had stabilized her. Stabilization was a temporary holding position. We needed to address the occlusion directly. The procedure took 47 minutes. Ibarra stationed himself beside the readout the entire time, watching the throat sac while I worked, calling the color shifts in a low, steady voice. Pale gold holding, still pale gold. Slight shift toward amber, I see it, I said, adjusting. Back to pale gold. At the 41st minute, when the occlusion released, and the pressure readout dropped back through the correct curve, Ibarra's color calling stopped for a moment, and then he said, clearing amber, deepening amber, she's coming back. She was coming back. We closed and she went to TAC's post-op team, and we moved on to the next case. Sometime around the 8th hour, with the bay still running at all 3 stations and the residents working their supervised cases on the other side of the partition, Sofiane came and found me between cases and said, very quietly, that he thought one of his patients was distressed beyond what the clinical presentation explained. The throat sac was flushing in an irregular pattern he hadn't seen before, not matching any of Ibarra's briefed indicators, and the patient was making a sound Sofiane described as, not a pain sound. I went and looked. The patient was a young Vel-Rath female, maybe 22, no visible caste marking, civilian resettlement group. Her injuries were moderate and Sofiane had handled them correctly. What he was seeing was not a clinical emergency. The throat sac was flushing in the irregular pattern he'd described, cycle between pale gold and dim amber, not settling, not resolving. I pulled up the translation interface. Can you understand me? I asked. Pause then. Yes, you are safe, I said. Your injuries are being treated. Is there something you need? A longer pause. The throat sac cycled. Then she said something in Vel-Rath that the translator rendered as, are there others from my convoy? Are they here? I looked at Sofiane. He pulled up the intake manifest and scrolled through it quickly, cross-referencing the convoy section assignment she had given at intake. Several people from your convoy section are aboard, he said. They are in recovery. They are being cared for. The throat sac slowed. The cycling reduced. It settled toward the dim amber of pain managed and present, not the bright gold of acute distress, she said. Thank you. We moved on. But I thought about that for a while. The thing the throat sac was telling us that the monitor couldn't. The thing that wasn't in the clinical briefings. Because it wasn't a clinical problem. The particular kind of fear that isn't about one's own survival. The answer for it that didn't require surgery. Sophian handled it correctly. I told him so. The Endurance was calling in from the second convoy by the end of the third hour. Worse numbers. A lattice strike that had caught a smaller transport in open space without cover. No asteroid shadow. And the medical channel from the Endurance's chief was clipped and fast. In the way you get when you're processing faster than you'd prefer. Persistence reached the third convoy at hour 4. And their numbers were comparable. The Goodwill had extended its cargo bay as overflow and was taking stabilized patients from all 3 ships, converting Cargo Deck B into a recovery ward with the focused pragmatism of people who have done it before. At hour 7 I was finishing a repair to the secondary cardiac node of a Vel-Rath civilian female, mid-age resettlement group, caught in the compartment breach by the second strike's pressure wave. When Ibarra said very quietly, "Her throat sac is clearing," I looked. He was right. The pale gray was receding, the ash tone of deep shock giving way to the dim gold of pain, and the dim gold was better than the pale gray, because the pale gray was below consciousness, and the dim gold was coming back up. "Keep the line running," I said. Another 20 minutes under the lights, then tax post-op team. Ibarra didn't move right away. He was still watching the throat sac. "It changes so fast," he said. "The color shift when they turn. You don't see that in humans." "No," I said. "She's going to be all right." "She's going to be all right," I confirmed. Stood there, for a moment in the quiet of the surgical bay, with the emergency lighting amber overhead, and the patient breathing her slow double intake and her throat sac, showing the dim gold of someone who was hurting but was here, was present, was coming back from where she had been going. It was a very ordinary moment in the way that all those moments are ordinary. Competent people doing what they were trained to do. No drama, no ceremony, just the work meeting the need. It was enough. In my experience, it is always enough. Commander Osei Boateng came to the surgical bay hatch around the 9th hour and told me I had 15 minutes and I should use them. I used 10 of them eating something I don't remember, and 5 of them standing at the secondary viewport on the port side of the medical corridor. The view from that viewport ran along the Condor's operational beam, not the clean forward vista of the bridge, practical lateral angle of a working ship. What I saw was the Dominion destroyer, the Vel-Rath, now moved to approximately 100 kilometers off our port bow, fully lit now, running lights, sensor array indicators glowing their operational amber, the navigation beacons that Vel-Rath military vessels carry in the forward undercarriage, casting a gold wash against the hull. It was watching. It had been watching since before we arrived. It had matched our emission profile during the dark run. It had held station during the IFF spoof approach. It had not interfered, had not hailed, had not done anything that could be characterized as either hostile or helpful. It was simply present, watching the work. Went back to the surgical bay. By the 14th hour, all critical cases from the 3 convoys had been triaged and either treated or stabilized. The final accounting was a thing I do not make public in operational reports. Those numbers belong to the mission record, not to the narrative. But the number that mattered, the number that represented the work's outcome, was 379 survivors from the Vel-Rath alone, with comparable proportions from the Endurance and Persistence convoys, all of them alive and in recovery or stable. We lost 4 patients, 2 whose injuries had been too advanced by the time they reached us, the window already closed. 1 from a surgical complication that I had done everything correctly to avoid, and that had happened anyway, which is a kind of loss that sits differently from the others. And 1 child, a child of approximately 6 years old from the resettlement group, triage notes I had read coming in, and whose injuries had not been survivable, and who had not survived the transit from the convoy to our airlock. I note those 4, and I carry them and I go on, which is the only option. Osei Boateng called me to the bridge at the 15th hour. I had not been on the bridge since the dark running drift began. Coming up from the surgical bay into the bridge, the wide forward viewport, the full scale of Dominion space, the operational lights running properly again after the long amber red of emergency power, was slightly disorienting in the way that it always is after long hours of close work. I stood for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The Vel-Rath was 40 kilometers off the port bow. Close enough that I could see the detail of her hull markings in our running lights. Close enough to make out the command tower structure and the sensor array configuration that Ibarra had described as standard Vel-Rath destroyer class. She was large. At that proximity, the scale of a destroyer-class warship is not abstract. She was 4 times our length and carried weapon systems, designed for engagements we were not equipped to participate in. She had been sitting at this distance for hours, and no one had done anything about it, and nothing had happened. "It's been there the whole time?" I asked. "Shadowed us through the dark run," Ademi said. "Held during the FF approach. Moved up after we went operational." She paused. "It's been hailing us for 20 minutes. Commander's been waiting for you." Osi Boteng was at the communications console. She stepped back as I came in. "Sit," she said. "This one is yours. Think you should hear it first." On the screen, cued at the channel stack, was an open hail marked with the Vel-Rath's designation and a name. Senior Admiral Veth Karun Solis, commanding. Recognized the name without looking it up. I held my hand over the accept control for perhaps 4 or 5 seconds. Long enough to think about the broadcast. The 11 minutes and 42 seconds. The word circus. The phrase performative generosity. The running accounting of failures. The applause. Long enough to think about what 10 years of that filing had actually meant. Whether the file was something I could open right now and find still organized the way I had arranged it, or whether the last 15 hours had rearranged it in ways I hadn't noticed. Then I accepted the channel. He was older than the broadcasts had suggested. This was the first thing I registered. Not his title, not his uniform, not the Vel-Rath's command chair visible behind him, but the fact that the broadcasts had always shown him in formal military presentation, the composed performance of a senior officer in a public setting, and what I was seeing now was a man who had been in that chair for a very long time, who looked it. His gray scales had the quality that Ibarra's briefings described as age-darkening, the deeper ash gray of a Vel-Rath past 60, with the particular stillness that the species carries in their faces when they are holding something carefully. His amber throat sac was pale, not the pale gray of shock, but the washed tone of sustained tension over time. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. I waited. "You are the medical officer," he said. The translator rendered it flat, no register. "Senior Medical Officer Marin Solis. Heirs Candor," I said. A pause. His throat sac moved, a small flex, color shifting toward amber and settling back. "I have been monitoring your medical channel since you arrived," he said. "Passive reception. I have your casualty reports from all 3 convoys." "Then you know the numbers," I said. "I know the numbers." He was quiet for a moment. The Chemsorth Compact declined to respond. The Veth-Soreth Union cited jurisdictional protocols. The Aaron Cluster sent a statement of condolence. He said the last phrase without particular inflection, which, in a man with 40 years of military composure, was its own kind of tone. "Yes," he said. "And you came." I didn't say anything. "My staff," he said, "prepared probability assessments in the 47 hours between the lattice, failure, and your arrival. Standard operational planning. Who would respond? What assets might arrive within useful timeframes? What we could realistically expect." The compact was assessed as unlikely to respond within 48 hours, even in the optimistic scenario. The Union was essentially non-operational given the jurisdictional constraint. The Aaron Cluster was assessed as unable to project relevant capability into this quadrant. He paused. Humanitarian relief was not included in the response matrix. "Why not?" I asked. He held my gaze for a moment that was slightly too long to be unconscious. "Because we had spent considerable institutional effort over the past decade establishing, in our official communications and public doctrine, that Earth's relief program was not a serious operational entity, that it was a performance, a gesture designed for galactic consumption rather than practical function." Another pause. When you spend sufficient time arguing a position, it becomes very difficult to include the opposite possibility in your operational calculations. Even when the evidence does not support the argument, it is a failure of analysis. "I am aware that it is a failure of analysis. Your convoys needed help," I said. "We have a call. That's this entire program, Admiral. That's the whole thing." "You sent 4 ships," he said. 4 ships into a lattice engagement corridor, with a software attack you could not guarantee would work. Running dark through a system you had never operated in, responding to a distress request from a government that had spent 10 years telling the galaxy that your program was theater. He stopped. Why? I had not prepared an answer to this, because it had not occurred to me that I would be asked it. I thought about it for a moment, actually thought, not the official doctrine formulation, not the mission statement language, but the actual reason. Because 308 civilians were in that convoy's passenger compartment, I said. And when there's a call and people can be helped, we go. That's the reason. There isn't a more complicated version of it. Solus was quiet for a long time. His throat sac had shifted, not the controlled amber of sustained tension. Something quieter. Something at the edge of what Ibarra's briefing notes described, but that the notes hadn't given a precise clinical name because, I suspected, it hadn't needed one in the contexts those notes were written for. The Vel-Rath's passenger manifest, he said finally. My daughter's family was aboard, her mate and their 2 children, for settlement assignment to the agricultural hub. I kept my face still. I had operated on a child from the Vel-Rath, not the youngest, not the one we had lost, but an older child, perhaps 9 years old, who had come in with a fractured secondary thoracic plate and internal hemorrhage from the strike's pressure wave. We had repaired the hemorrhage, stabilized the plate, and moved the child to post-operative recovery, and the last report I had was that the child was conscious and had accepted food. The child is recovering well, I said. I operated on that case personally. The plate fracture is stable and the internal damage has been addressed. The child should have full recovery, his throat sac flushed. Amber, deep amber, not the controlled tone but the full reach of something he was not containing entirely, and it held for a moment before he settled it back. He said something in Vel-Rath. The translator did not render it. I have asked our translation team about this since. They believe the phrase fell outside the algorithm's standard equivalency mapping, not because it was untranslatable in principle, but because the specific combination of terms had no construction in standard that carried the same weight at the same density. Some things compress, some things won't. I don't have the translation, as gently as I could, but I think I understand it. He looked at me directly, the first time he had held full eye contact since the channel opened. Vel-Rath eyes, amber gold with the ringed pupils of the military caste, highly refractive in direct light, and in them, the expression of a man who is carrying something that doesn't have a name in any registry he was trained to consult. We sat there, in the open channel's quiet, the old admiral in his command chair aboard the ship he had named his own vessel after, and the medical officer who had been watching his broadcasts for 10 years. 40 kilometers apart in Dominion space. The stars not moving. My broadcast, he said. The assessment to the council. I remember it, I said. I know, he said. I have been informed that you watched it 3 times the night it aired. I blinked. I was not certain I had heard correctly. Your relief ship's passive intelligence file, he said, with something in his voice that might have been, in a man of his age and formality, as close to a wry acknowledgement as existed in his register. The Dominion maintained a monitoring file on all Earth humanitarian relief assets, operating in our quadrant. Standard practice. We were very thorough about our monitoring. He paused. We were very thorough about a number of things. I waited. I would like to retract the broadcast, he said. That isn't necessary, I said. It was 10 years ago. I would like to, nonetheless. Throat sac moved, the word I used. Circus, I said. Circus, he confirmed. It was inaccurate. Whatever I thought I was describing, whatever phenomenon I was categorizing, it was not what I was actually looking at. What I was actually looking at was this. 4 ships going dark in a lattice engagement corridor on a software attack with no guarantee, 308 people in a passenger compartment because a call came in and there was a call to answer. He was quiet. I did not understand what I was looking at. Osi Boteng had come to stand beside me at some point in the last few minutes. I hadn't heard her approach. She was looking at the screen, at the old admiral, the expression she carried when she was weighing something and deciding how much of her weight to put on it. She leaned forward, past me, and said very simply, "We appreciate that, Admiral." Your convoys are stable and will maintain station until you're satisfied with the triage. Outcomes. If there's anything else you need from us, use this channel. It was the most Boating sentence ever constructed. Precise, warm enough, forward. She had absorbed everything on the channel, and she had decided that the right instrument for this moment was not the response that matched its emotional weight, but the response that moved the work forward, which was what she always chose, which was what made her the commander. Circus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Commander, your team's performance over the last 15 hours was..." He stopped. He was choosing words and not finding the ones that measured correctly. "It was exactly what your doctrine describes. I would not have believed that before today. We'd be glad to have you believe it going forward," Boating said. "Get some rest, Admiral. You look like you've been in that chair a long time." She ended the channel. I sat there for a moment. "Go eat something," she said. "Then another 6 hours. Then I'm rotating you to post-op and putting TAC in the surgical bay." "I'm fine," I said. "I know you're fine," she said. "Eat anyway." I went and ate and came back and did another 6 hours in the surgical bay, and then Boating made good on the rotation and I took post-operative observation. Post-op on a hospital ship at full capacity, 3 convoys worth of Vel-Rath casualties recovering in every available space, was not lighter work. It was different work. And I moved through it for another 8 hours, watching throat sacs clear from gold through amber, to the calm dark that indicated pain managed, stable, present. It was methodical. It was what the work looked like when the acute phase was done and the steady phase had started. Beat. And there was something in the rhythm of it that I needed after the preceding hours, even if I couldn't have said what. We stayed on station for 3 days. During those 3 days, Mark Veliani worked with the Dominion software engineering team. 3 engineers arrived by Vel-Rath shuttlecraft on the second morning. Very formal, very correct, very quiet, in the way of people who are not certain of their welcome and have decided that professional precision is the appropriate response. To fully propagate the IFF correction through the lattice's distributed architecture. It was not simple work. The lattice had been designed with deep encryption at every node to resist exactly this kind of external modification, which meant that the propagation path required manual authentication at 17 relay points. Mark Velianis described the process as the longest handshake in engineering history and said it without complaint. By the end of the second day, the lattice was operational again. Correctly operational, civilian transponders correctly classified, the failed subroutine replaced at every node, and the remaining convoys, in the Dominion's interior transit lanes, cleared to move. I met the Dominion engineers briefly on the second day, in the corridor, outside the Condor's engineering compartment. They were moving through the authentication sequence with the focused efficiency of people who are very good at their work and are concentrating on it to the exclusion of everything else. One of them, the youngest, scaled in the gray-green that indicated not quite full maturity, looked up when I passed and held eye contact for a moment longer than the task required. He said something brief in Vel-Rath. The translator rendered it after a pause as, "The child who was in the forward compartment. We were told she is recovering." Pronoun clarified which child he meant. Not the youngest. The older one, the thoracic plate repair. The one who had been eating. "She is recovering well," I said. "She should have full function." He held eye contact for another moment. Then he turned back to the relay interface and resumed the authentication sequence. I don't think he needed anything more from that exchange than the information. The information was good. That was the whole of it. In the afternoon of the second day, 2 of the Vel-Rath recovered civilians, both from the resettlement group, both cleared by TAC's post-op team for limited movement. Asked through the ship medic whether they might walk the corridor between their temporary and the observation port at the end of the medical deck. An entirely reasonable request. The corridor was clear. Port looked out on the system at afternoon light angle, and the walk would take them 5 minutes at most. I approved it without pause. I saw them once, from the far end of the corridor, making that slow, careful walk in the particular way of people who are still learning which movements hurt. They stood at the observation port for a while. The light through the glass was the amber gold of the system's sun at low angle, and it caught their throat sacks, and made the color there more readable than it usually was in the surgical bay's working light. Sacks were holding a steady, quiet amber, not acute gold, not the pale gray of shock. The color Ibarra's notes described, in careful clinical language, as physiological resting state under continued duress, translated out of the clinical register to close enough to all right for now. I was willing to call it that. It was, in its small way, the work's answer to itself. Not the dramatic version, not the version anyone broadcasts, just the color of two people standing at a viewport in someone else's ship, alive, watching a star they knew from the wrong side of its light. The Goodwill rotated patients back to their convoy vessels as they stabilized. The Endurance and Persistence completed their triage cycles. The medical team filed formal outcome reports with the Dominion's Joint Medical Authority. Standard relief mission protocol, clinical data, intervention outcomes, follow-up care recommendations for cases we'd had to discharge before full recovery. Everything documented, everything filed. The work leaves a record. The Vel-Rath stayed 40 kilometers off our port bow for all 3 days. It never hailed us again. Every time I came to the bridge, it was there. Fully lit, running lights on, sensors active, present. Not threatening, not demonstrating anything, just there, watching. On the morning we prepared to depart, the 4th day, early watch, the convoys cleared and moving under their own power. I was at the secondary console reviewing discharge records when Adeyemi said quietly, "The Vel-Rath is signaling, not hailing, signaling. The distinction in interstellar communication protocol is specific. A hail requests a channel. A signal transmits without requesting acknowledgement." Dominion military procedure maintained the distinction formally. On the communication screen, in Dominion transmission format, one line in Vel-Rath script. Below it, the translator's rendering. "You sent us" was not theater. Nothing else. No request for response. The signal had been sent and it was done. Osiboting read it over my shoulder. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Log it, standard comms archive, let's get home." We left Dominion space at 0700 ship time. The Vel-Rath held its station as we went, and I watched it through the bridge viewport until it was a point of light. And then, until it was not distinguishable from the other points of light, then, there was only open space ahead and the jump corridor forming on the navigation display, and the Candor doing what it always does. Have been asked, since then, whether I felt vindicated. The honest answer is that I don't know what that feeling is or how to locate it. Vindication implies that someone needed to be proved wrong, and I had spent 10 years not thinking of it in those terms. Not thinking of it as a contest between Earth's doctrine and the Vel-Rath Dominion's opinion of Earth's doctrine, but as work that needed doing and was being done, and the opinion was noise around the work, which had its own logic and its own weight that the noise couldn't get at. What I actually felt, during those 3 days and on the transit home, was tired, which is always what I feel after a hard deployment. And alongside the tired, something that took me a while to name. A kind of gratitude which I know sounds wrong, but what I mean by it is gratitude that the call had come in when we were close enough to answer it. The Vel-Rath had been running for an asteroid shadow and had found one that the child was eating. Tack found me in the officer's lounge on the sec transit day. He brought 2 cups of something that was technically coffee, was its own kind of optimism, and he sat down across from me and didn't say anything for a while. "You know what the Vel-Rath state media is going to do with this," he said, eventually. "Something complicated," I said. "Several somethings," he said, "probably over an extended period. There's going to be a lot of very careful framing involved." "Probably," I said. "Does it matter?" I thought about it. The file I'd been keeping for 10 years, the broadcast, the updates, the running accounting. I thought about whether it was still organized the same way, or whether the last 70 hours had rearranged it in ways I hadn't noticed. "No," I said. "Not really." He drank his coffee, I drank mine. 379 from the lead convoy alone, he said. The other 2 ships, comparable proportions. Lattice correctly operational by the end of day 2. "Margveliani did good work," I said. "Margveliani always does good work," Tack said. "It's slightly irritating." He paused. "The child," he said. "The child is eating," I said. He nodded. "That's the one," he said. "That's always the one." I agreed with him that it was always the one. We sat there for a while in the officer's lounge with the jump corridor, running outside the viewport and the stars steady, and the Condor doing what it always does, which is moving toward wherever the next call is coming from. I was tired, and I was grateful, and the work was done for now, is what it always is. Done for now, and then a call, and then done again, and then a call. Somewhere behind us in Dominion space, I suspected, an old admiral was sitting in a command chair doing arithmetic, counting the convoys, counting the names on the recovered manifest, counting against some internal ledger, the distance between what he had said into a council chamber microphone 10 years ago and what he had watched, a passive sensor array for the last 70 hours. Working out how to categorize something that his staff's probability matrix had not included in the response column. I hoped it took him a while to finish that arithmetic. Some things are worth sitting with. Some recalculations shouldn't be rushed. When we came out of the jump corridor, and the Condor's approach sequence engaged and the familiar transit resolved on the forward display, Osi Boateng's voice came over the all-ship channel. Medical team, exceptional work. I mean that without qualification, stand down to routine operations. Debrief in 24 hours. Rest until then. Turned off my headset and went to find a bunk and slept for 10 hours. The throat sac stayed in my memory for a long time afterward. The amber shifting back toward calm dark, the pale gray clearing, deep gold of acute pain giving way to something steadier and easier and present. Not the dramatic moments. Never the dramatic moments. The quiet ones. The color clearing in the surgical bay, the double intake of a patient who was hurting but was still here, for the ordinary competence of people doing the work, because the work was there to be done, and the call was there to be answered. That's the whole thing. It's always been the whole thing.